More interesting. So when you go on holiday to a new city, when you ask friends where they went, they nearly always say, I went to the old bit, not to the new bit. And they go to the old bit because it's interesting, because it's full of buildings which have detail and ornament and a little bit of history, and the buildings tell stories, and that's why we like them. One of the things that's happened now over the last 50 years or so, not just in Seoul, but all over the world, is that modern development has lost all of that detail. Lots of the buildings have got very boring and soulless, and it's like they've lost all their stories. So that's the thing that we're trying to recapture through this Biennale. We're trying to get new buildings to tell stories, to have detail and interest and complexity, because that fills our hearts with joy. It makes you feel differently when you walk past them. So we're trying to make the city and the buildings radically more human. We think buildings happen to us because we're not politicians, we're not architects or designers, we're not property developers. So we're trying to challenge that, and we're trying to get people to look at buildings all around them and have an opinion and demand something better. So the eye is there to say, look at the buildings, yeah? And we're not trying to tell people what to think. It doesn't matter what you think, but have an opinion, because it has a huge impact on your life. And we all know this because some buildings make us feel happy and excited. Other buildings are kind of flat and shiny and dull and slightly depressing. So you know that buildings affect your life a lot. They affect your brain, they affect your heart, they affect the way we work together in our lives together. So we're trying to get people to look and have an opinion. It doesn't matter what it is, have any opinion, but talk about buildings and how they make you feel, and then ask for more. So the thing that's really different about the Seoul Biennale is it's for the public. So it's not for architects, it's not for professional people, although they're very welcome. We're trying to speak to the public, and we're trying to get people to think about buildings and almost to have a conversation with the whole city, with all 9 million people, about architecture and buildings. So the way we're going to do that is put this big installation in the middle of the park, in the middle of the city, and it's quite dramatic. I think people are going to come off the street and go, oh my word, what is that? And there's this big 90-meter long structure, and then it's 16 meters tall. So it's a big structure with a twist in the middle, and then the outside of it is like a magazine with images and stories and pictures, and trying to get people to think about boring buildings and joyful buildings and the difference between them and how they impact on our lives. So that Humanise Wall is like a provocation. It's a bit like a little slap on the cheek saying, oi, we've got to talk about this. And then next to it, on the other part of the park, are what we're calling the walls of public life. And these are 24 different sculptures, which are all like a small bit of building. So if you think, it's like somebody's gone along with a giant pair of scissors and cut out a bit of a building and then put it in the park. But they're all really different, and they're meant to give you a feeling for how amazing the outside of buildings could be. So some are made of stone, some are made of wood, some are very modern, some are very traditional. Some have been made by architects, some of them have been made by tailors, one's been made by a chef, a food chef. So they're all different creative people trying to imagine how interesting the outside of a building could be. And let you look at it and think, God, it would be amazing. What if my home was like that? What if my school, what if the outside of my office had a really interesting building? And how exciting that would be, and how different your life would be actually, and how different the whole city would feel. So when you think about anything that's creative, whether it's a building or a sculpture or a piece of art, there are three ways of thinking about it: through your head and your hand and your heart. And the Biennale is trying to change or have a conversation about all three things. Some of it is about your head, that's the exhibitions bit. So go there, really discover and think really hard about buildings and how they shape our lives. Then there's the other bit, the walls of public life are the hand. And then the big Humanise Wall is like our heart. It's trying to talk to us with passion and emotion, and particularly because it has the voice of citizens on it. So it's more like a campaign in some ways. And that's about trying to change society. And when you think how society changes, nearly always it changes not because of the politicians, but because of communities. So if we're trying to help Seoul become radically more human and for the buildings to become more interesting and more soulful and to influence all the other cities in the world, we've got to start with communities. So back in last winter, we ran an open call and a big invitation for any creators and any communities in Seoul to apply to take part in the Biennale. And we had 83 applications. They were really good. So the quality was amazing. It was very hard to pick the shortlist, but we eventually ended up with 9 projects who we've been working with ever since January or February. And they've been going through a process of talking about buildings and how they make them feel and applying their creative skills to imagine how much better it could be. And then to visualize that and to create an image of it, which has gone on the Humanise Wall. And then we're going to showcase all of their work and all of their ideas throughout the whole Biennale. So it starts off with the project in the neighborhood, then it becomes a big thing for the Biennale for the city, and then it's going to be influential around the whole world. Because people understand what needs to happen, because they live it every day. So if we listen really closely to how communities feel and what happens in a neighborhood, then we'll know how to solve problems at a bigger level in the city and around the world. But it starts with communities. The Biennale is about architecture, but architecture is like a huge subject. It's about buildings and streets and cities and the inside and the outside. So we're trying to focus on one thing, and that's the outside, what you might think of as like the skin of the building, just the external skin of the building. And that's because that's the thing that matters to most people. Far more people go outside a building than go in it. And we've actually done some research to look at the numbers, and literally tens of thousands more people go past a building than go inside it. So we're trying to have a conversation about the outside of the building and how you make that more joyful and engaging and human. So all our work with the communities has been to say, just talk about the outside of the building, you know, how you walk past it every day, how it makes you feel, whether it makes you excited and curious or leaves you feeling cold and unloved, and see how we can come up with new ideas to inspire the politicians and the architects and the developers to build more interesting outsides of buildings. So it's like a skin Biennale, about the skin of the outside of buildings and how we can make it more joyful. And that's partly a sustainability question, because people talk a lot about carbon when they're talking about sustainability, and that matters hugely. But if nobody loves a building, then nobody's going to look after it, and it'll get knocked down and demolished, and all that carbon dissipates anyway. So when the bit of the sustainability question that people often ignore is about whether something's loved, whether somebody's actually going to care enough about a building to look after it, and maybe after 20 to 30 years they'll adapt it and repair it, not just knock it down. So that question of how do we create something now that people really love and that will last. So we talk a lot about that. How do we do things which are loved and last? Because that is crucial to them being sustainable. You need to actually love the building, and you only love things which have had love invested in them. You know, and that, when you think about a building, is the sense of materials and three-dimensionality, the textures, whether somebody's really cared enough to craft it in a way that feels special and generous. So that's why we focus on the outside, not just the inside. We all experience buildings the whole time, whether you like it or not, all the time, every day. So talk about them, use any words you want, but have a conversation about buildings and then start to really get involved in how your city changes. You know, have an opinion as your city, get involved and demand more interesting, joyful buildings. So we're trying to find a way to give people confidence to talk about buildings, for everybody to see it as one of the most important things that happens in this whole city, and give a sense of kind of confidence that that conversation is not just going to be for 8 weeks. You know, we're going to have a great Biennale, but this conversation needs to go on for 20 years. And then we'll have been able to create a city which is as beautiful and interesting and hopeful, I think, and optimistic as all the people who live in it. It's been like a huge roller coaster journey. We've got an amazing team of people in SNG, in Seoul Metropolitan Government, in Heatherwick Studio based in London, and then lots of creatives and partners, some amazing curators, people from all around the art and culture scene in Seoul. When you talk to people in other places, they're like, have you been to Seoul? It's amazing. So Seoul is like this, it's like cresting a wave. It's really one of the most influential cities in the world. So we're really honoured and quite humbled, I suppose, to be a part of this kind of Biennale. And I feel very proud and excited to be part of it.